All right, looks like we have the majority of the group that said they were coming in today, so we can get started here. First of all, thanks everybody for joining. This is the first Buffalo Tug since August of last year. It's the first one of 2022, obviously. And we'll let Morgan walk through the agenda real quick, and then we can get into the new committee members, and then we'll let Lee take it over.
Right, yeah.
On the next slide, we'll have the agenda. So just to kick things off, Lee, are you able to? Here we go, perfect. So we have a new committee today, since last year, so we all wanted to introduce ourselves, and we'll take a quick minute to do that. And then after that, Lee is going to present to us. So Lee has a long resume, and I won't be able to get everything, but essentially, I'll list a couple of things. So Lee graduated from Cornell. He also is an adjunct faculty member at NYU. He founded DecisionViz in 2012, hoping to help leaders use data to obviously persuade decisions and drive action and strategy. So he's going to present to us, teach us a little bit about the language of visualization, decoding visual data patterns, and also some foundational traits that can help us on dashboards. So you should also see a poll through Zoom. Feel free to take that. We're going to draw some winners for Tableau gift cards after the meeting. So enjoy. Kick it off, Lee.
Give people a minute to answer the poll. And I think you guys wanted to introduce yourselves.
We can move on to the next slide here. Previously, Chris Kane, you guys may be aware of, used to run the Buffalo Tug Group. He actually took a position with Tableau and was unable to keep leading the group. So he got the group you see on the screen here together. My name is Connor Giovanetti with New Era Cap, and the other folks from New Era Cap are Morgan Sustak and Melissa Fisher. And with us, we have Christine Lilly and Jessica Simic from M&T, along with Robert Quebral and Alex Huerta from ACB Auctions, and Sujit City with Citibank. So we'll be the new committee member for Buffalo Tug right now. And if anybody wants to join or is interested in joining, please write down one of our emails and reach out to us, and we can make that happen. But Lee, if you want to kick it off here, maybe do a quick introduction for yourself, whatever Morgan didn't cover here for you here, and dive into the presentation. That'd be great.
She said more than enough. We'll get into, I think people will pick up on the things that are interesting and that I've been working on as we go through this. So yeah, thanks for having me at your inaugural meeting for the new team. I know what it takes to put together a user group because I ran 2 user groups for 8.5 years. So you should definitely appreciate what these folks are doing to help keep the group going. And I'm calling in from Westfield, New Jersey, which is kind of in the middle of the state, and it is gray and raining a lot here, which is better than it being gray and snowing, which can still happen this time of year. So I'll just let the rain go. Now, so here I am on the page, and I like to share something that I'm particularly proud of. My daughter attends James Madison University, and last year I volunteered to help them overhaul their COVID dashboard. And the reason I'm bringing that up is they had a lot of data, but they didn't think about what they wanted to really communicate. And that's what, when I saw that, that's why I jumped in to see if they needed some help. And that's really what I want to talk with you about today as we get into some examples. As I mentioned, my name's Lee Feinberg, and I'm the president founder of DecisionViz, and we're a management consulting company. And our focus is really on the areas of scaling data literacy and data storytelling. And if there's one thing in this world I love my daughter more, but I do love Tableau. And I started DecisionViz a decade ago, and we're also a Tableau partner. And I know Tableau very well. I actually started working with them when nobody had heard, almost nobody had heard of Tableau in 2009. And I was actually at a company where we became Tableau's largest worldwide customer at the time. Now, by today's standards, it's quite small, but back then it was a pretty big deal. So I've stayed involved with them for a long time. And I've also was a Tableau ambassador for 4 years in addition to running the user groups. So the thing about being successful with data visualization, and you may be experiencing this, it really requires more than just being good at Tableau and knowing how to use the features. You have to be what you may have heard the term data literate. And I've been teaching the ideas that I've developed and the methods I've researched about data literacy. Fortunately, I've been able to do it around the world, which is pretty cool. And it's been really rewarding professionally and personally. So today I'd like to cover some ideas and share with you that I think you're going to get a new perspective on data visualization that goes beyond just building dashboards and worksheets and knowing features. And it doesn't matter if you're an advanced designer or you're just starting out with something like Tableau Creator. I think this is really going to save you a lot of time and more importantly, make your work have more impact. And I think this is really going to be quite different than maybe some of the other kinds of talks you've heard about data visualization. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit dramatic, but I've really seen it help my clients, and it helps them not just at work, but it helps them with their careers too, when they're able to start doing their work at a different level. So the 3 things I want to talk about with you today. Oh, and by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to jump in. The team's going to be monitoring the Q&A. You don't have to wait until the end. If something catches your attention, please throw it out there and we'll try to field it and answer the questions as they come in appropriately. So the first thing is that you're not in charge when it comes to analyzing visuals. So what do I mean? It's not really exactly true about that. But so what is important though is that when you create a visual, it sends a clear and direct message to the reader's brain. So it's really important to understand what you're transmitting to your audience. Color has the ability to really clarify your message, but it also has the ability to confuse when it's not used properly. So we're going to go through a couple case studies and look at how to take poor use of color in dashboards and use it in different ways so that your message is a lot clearer. The third is that the goal of creating a dashboard is really to help conduct an analysis and answer questions. But what I see is that most dashboards are set up in a way that goes against really how your audience is prepared to consume the information. So we'll get into that a little bit more. Now, I don't mean to sound negative. The point is, I'm going to show you some simple ways and some simple steps that you can take to make sure your visuals avoid these problems. And there'll be things that you can do right away. These aren't just theoretical or vague ideas. These are specific things you can do. But let me set the stage a little bit just to give you some context of how this works and why this is important. So you have the ability to recognize complex patterns in literally the blink of an eye. And here's something that always blows my mind every time I've said it, even though I've said this probably hundreds of times. It's that your brain is working on an image as soon as you see it. So in a way, you're thinking about what it means before you're using effort to think about it. The reason this is important is that this is happening automatically. So when you show images and information in a way that doesn't correctly communicate the message, or it's shown in a confusing way, it slows your readers down because you're not giving your brain the chance to do what it does so well. Now, so the longer it takes to decipher what the meaning is, people are more inclined to maybe ignore it, which is the worst thing. And then they just kind of keep moving on. But if you can harness your brain's natural processing power, then you can present information in a way that lets people go through enormous amounts of data and get to what really matters. And what I really want you to soak in is this next piece. What really matters in all of our work is that people start making decisions and taking action based on the visualizations. It's not about presenting information or getting people to wade through all the data. That's kind of your job typically as an analyst. What you want to do is help them get to making decisions and taking action. It's really important to keep that in mind. So when you understand how the brain interprets these kinds of patterns, you're not just going to be clicking around and picking options in Tableau or other visualization software, because you're going to have a better understanding about why you're making the choice and what's going to happen when your audience looks at the visualization. So I mentioned this idea of your brain is expecting to get certain patterns. So what does that really mean? Now, there's a lot of patterns that could go into this, but today we're just going to cover two of the most common patterns, which are gradients and color. And maybe you didn't think about them as patterns until I just mentioned that. And let me explain what the difference is here, because a lot of times when you see color, you're actually meaning, it actually can mean two different things. So gradient is usually used with measures, and it is represented by different shades of a single color, say going from light to dark, or a range of multiple colors, maybe going from something like red to black. When you talk about the term color or color hue, it means unique single colors, which represent the values of dimensions. So one is used for measures, one is used for dimensions in terms of kind of Tableau talk. And I'm focusing on these two because they're the most commonly used patterns. And unfortunately, I would say they're the most abused because people love to use color and gradients. So let me talk about a few of the abuses. And as I go through this, maybe you'll be thinking, yeah, I do that. If you don't do any of these things, that's great. But maybe you'll still learn something today. The first one is using too many gradients or colors. And when you do that, nothing stands out. And it's really hard for someone to know what's important, right? And that's the goal here, is to deliver some kind of message and focus people on certain ideas that you're presenting to them. The second one is when you use the same gradient or the same color to represent more than one thing. When you do that, it's really messing with your brain, because now it's harder for the viewer to understand what they're looking at, because they're not sure now what it really refers to, or if there's some relationship between that, because the same color, you would think it means the same thing. The third one is just using color when it's not needed, or gradients when they're not needed. And this confuses your audience, because when they see it, there's an assumption that it has a meaning. So you have to be careful. So all of these things take away from that automatic processing and slow down the work, and just can create a lot of confusion. So I could probably list another dozen violations, but we don't have time to do that. And I just want to get to a few practical things that we can work on together. And so let's just do that right now. And these are real dashboards that I found out there. These are not things I made up just to have for the sake of this discussion. So, and this one caught my attention because it seemed like the author really liked using the orange gradient. And the first thing I noticed is there's no color legends. So you don't even know what's going on and what these different color ranges represent. And then you've got these green headers and a gray background. And then the pie chart has even more colors. And the goal, as I said, is to make your message stand out. So the more colors you're using, like is going on here, it's much harder to sift through it very quickly and understand what's important and what the real message is. There's one more thing I'd like to point out is I recommend using a white background for a couple reasons. It looks cleaner. And the second is that gray becomes an important color that we're going to use in our visuals as we change the what's been done here. And so we can't use gray and gray. Like I mentioned, you don't want to have it twice. So if you're using a colored background, here's two things you can do. One is just see how it looks as a white background. The other thing is, if it's the same as colors in your visuals, change it to something that's not the same. So sometimes you see people using a blue background and then they have blue in their actual visual. And again, you're kind of mixing the colors and maybe the messages there. So these are a couple quick tips you can do to change that up. Now let's get into really looking at this one. So the first thing I wanted to do was go in and I added the color legends. Now I wouldn't put them there if I was presenting it, but for the purposes of this, I just wanted to get them out there. And you can immediately see that there's some problems because each of these ranges for amount expended is different. So how can you use it for making any kind of decisions when the same color, orange, might mean something different on a different chart? And then you've got some couple of oranges also in the pie chart. So it's very confusing right away. And what's happening now is I'm thinking that maybe, well, dark orange in the pie chart is related to dark orange on one of the bar charts or one of the gradients, and they're not, right? And so it becomes very difficult to start processing what this could be. So what are some things we could do to start fixing this? I always like to start with pie charts because I really don't like pie charts. We don't have enough time to get into that today. But if you'd like to talk about pie charts, shoot me a note. So how can we get rid of the pie chart? Because one of the things I already mentioned is it's got the greens that are the greens in the headers, and it's got the oranges that are used already. So we've got to do something to fix that. But if we just get rid of the color on here, something like this pie chart doesn't really work because now it gets a little harder to tell the slices apart because everything is gray, even though you have the lines dividing it. You really wouldn't want to show it like this. So the option is to take the pie chart and turn it into a different type of chart. Typically, I recommend using a bar chart, sorted either low to high or high to low. This is a big improvement, and it has a lot of advantages. So first, in terms of data literacy, let's talk about that. So when you are using too much color, we already talked about how that's distracting, but too much data can also be overwhelming. So for example, in this label, they've used the entire value, 191 million, et cetera. But do you really think you need all of that information to make a decision on something? Probably not. If you do, sure, put it all there. But in most cases, you can simplify it down to something like this with a single digit. And yes, the reason a lot of people don't do this is because it takes one extra step or maybe two extra steps in the software. So they just use the defaults to what's given them, and they really don't think about the user as much and what the effect it will have on him or her, and the message that they're trying to get and how useful it will be to work with that. So that's a simple thing you can do to take a pie chart, simplify it down to a bar chart, and then also I recommend simplifying the number of digits that you're using. Maybe you could even get rid of a decimal point. In this case, I just kept it. So let's tackle the rest of this and see what we can turn it into. Now, one thing I see is on most dashboards that doesn't get a lot of love is the title. And the title is incredibly important. The job of the title is to set the reader's expectations. Think about when you're reading a book, there's always a title for the chapter that tells you what's going to happen. Unfortunately, what I usually see in terms of titles is a logo, of course, and some vague description of what the page is about. So in this case, you see city spending. Now, depending on who the audience is that is looking at this dashboard, that could have a lot of different meanings and what they're expecting to see. So if you can make your title very specific and detailed, it really helps tune the reader into the message that you want them to get. So I took a look around the dashboard to try to see what I thought maybe the message was. And I don't know if I got it right, but I thought what they were trying to get across here is that they're trying to show spending for one particular year because everything is about that year. So I figured that should be part of the title. So keep that part in mind. And then I looked at some other things that were going on. And I thought, well, you know, with maybe a little bit better organization, we could condense some of this information and come up with a really great title. So here's what I ended up with. And I also was able to build that quick filter right into the title. So it was very apparent that they should change it and what year it related to. So you do have to spend a little time thinking about it. We're going to actually take this to a whole nother level a little bit later on when we get to the end. Now, one of the things that you may have heard if you've been working with dashboards for a while is that people either start reading from the left or from the top. And in this case, this would be the first chart that they would see, since we moved the other chart kind of up into combined it into the title. And since this is the first chart they're going to see, I'd say that would be a great place to use the gradient, because you really want to focus their attention on what maybe is the most important information and make sure that that stands out. Now, the other thing that you may have noticed here is that this is sorted alphabetically. Now, it may have been done on purpose, but typically the default in something like Tableau is it does it alphabetically. I thought it would be better sorted low to high, especially here, because if you're using a gradient, you might not even have the highest value showing up when it's alphabetic. It could be a lot lower. So again, you want to make sure that people get a sense of what everything is about as quickly as possible. Now, the other nice thing that we've got is a lot of white space above this chart now because we reorganized it a little bit. So we can actually make this big enough and not even have any scrolling, which is really good, because whenever you can avoid scrolling, that's an excellent thing, because again, it gives somebody the complete picture right away. So here's what that new visual looks like. We have not done a lot of changes, but we've made a huge improvement. And again, seeing all the information at a glance is really important. And you can notice that the color legend is at the bottom. Always remember to put the legend. Here's the pie chart we talked about. And we already changed that one into a bar chart. So let's put that in there. And there's another thing I want to mention that you might have just noticed. When you go to a bar chart from the pie chart, now we've also got a lot more space. The pie chart takes up a lot of real estate, and I'm very stingy with the space I give to my charts, because it's important to make them take up the right amount of space, but no more or no less. And pie charts are very difficult to manage that way. So this is another advantage of going with the bar chart. On this bar chart, you can see that they are dates. And so I assumed that what they really were trying to show here was probably get across the idea of some kind of trend, which is better as a line chart. And we could actually just slide that and it looks fine right underneath that space. So now we've just freed up all kinds of real estate that we can use for the other charts. Now for these last two, we can't use the gradient again because it's different values. We've talked about that a few times. And so I went with just two bar charts. And so one of them, we were actually able to get rid of the scrolling, and the other one has some scrolling. just because there's just way too much information on it. And I decided to keep that one sorted the way it was. Now that that's going from high to low and the other one's going from high to low. So this is kind of a first stab at taking that original one. And we've got a complete view of the data, and it does it in the same amount of space. So we didn't just say, oh, I'll just make the dashboard even bigger, wider, and taller to do this. That's not really the way to go about it. You really want to think through how you can tackle it. Ideally, you could maybe even make it take up less space. There's one more step that I think can really give your dashboards a boost. We talked about how the title should be a single unifying idea. And that goes for each of the charts on here as well. Because what you want to do is have a single idea that engages the reader. You don't want to have a kind of vague and non-descriptive title. Each visual is part of a whole analysis, right? You're not having these individual charts here. They should be working together. And you want it to be clear what the role is of each of those charts. And as I mentioned in the beginning, that third point I made, I said that the dashboards are typically authored in a way that contradicts this idea of contributing to the whole. Because the goal of a dashboard is to answer questions that are helping people make decisions. But you'll see that the way that each of the worksheets are typically titled is to present information as a statement rather than as helping answer a question. So let's look at this example. So you have money spent is kind of one of the themes here. So let's start with the title and replace it with a question. So it's very specific now. And hopefully you're getting that sense that you're drawn in more. When you have a question, it's like your analytic thinking kicks in automatically. You can't stop it. It's like once you hear a question, you're inclined to want to answer it versus just having this kind of city spending and money spent, which are just kind of generic and they're not really that engaging. But let's see what it looks like now with the rest of the dashboard. So here we've got money spent by department. If the reader is thinking of some specific questions, then you can have a higher engagement by really tuning into their thinking. So let's see what we could do here. Let's replace that with how much did each department spend? Now, I know you might be thinking, it's just about the words. It's not really a big deal. But we're really trying to persuade people to draw them in and engage them in what we want them to think about. Because when you just say money spent by department, people might just look at the list very quickly and go, okay, whatever. You know, they might see a few high ones, but they're not really drawn in when you could say, how much did each one spend? Because now you're like, well, how much did each one spend, right? And you really kind of want to know that. So you're creating that curiosity, and then the reader is more interested to examine the data, not to study it just for the sake of trying to drill through the numbers, but they're really trying to answer that question. Let's just do one more example here. So on the trend line, it says money spent by month. So instead, we could turn that into what is the monthly spending trend? So we're making somebody think about, we're not just looking at the numbers, but we want to see a trend, right? So now they'd be like, wow, we've got one spot where it was going up a lot and then it went up again. And then we had this major drop off, not just what was being spent. So you're really creating that connection to what you want them to think about. Now, as I mentioned, I wanted to give you some very practical ideas. So one thing that I've got for you is a little workbook that you can download for free. And it covers a lot of the kinds of common statements that you might make for your dashboard titles and gives you some replacement options. So you can just go to questionyourdata.com/buffalo-tug, and we'll send this out later. And it should give you some, again, very practical things you can do right away to start improving your dashboards. So let's look at one more example, and then we can get to some Q&A. So this was an example of survey data. And you can see that they're using the same colors, in this case, these blues, to represent 4 completely different sets of information. So again, the first time someone sees this, and it's probably happened to you, you're like, wow, what do all these blues mean? How are they connected? But they're not connected. But you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. And so you're really creating confusion for no reason at all. Colors are so powerful, but you have to be very purposeful, not only with the colors that you choose, but how they work with other colors in the design. Now, when I really thought about what the author of this was trying to do, I also got the sense that they were trying to make it look cool, because not only with the colors, but they're using tree maps and these packed bubble charts, which are typically a little bit more advanced, and you have to be very careful with how you use them. So I think they were just trying to throw a lot of stuff in there to really say, hey, you know, we've got something that looks neat. But the goal is never to make it look cool. The goal is to be effective at getting your message across. That's what you're really trying to do. So let's see what we can do with this one. Well, we've already talked about pie charts. So we know what to do with that one. We'll just turn it into a bar chart like we did before. Now, this bar chart uses 2 blues. So they've got a dark blue and a light blue, which will make your brain think more like a gradient because it's 2 shades of blue. But if you recall, I said that gradients are only to be used for measures. And in this case, upstream and downstream are dimensions. So it's better to pick unique colors. But in this case, I said, let's do a blue and a red. Not for any particular reason. That's just what I thought might work well. Now, this bubble chart, it's very similar to a pie chart, except instead of size being on the slices of the pie, the size is used for the bubbles. So you could apply the same principle and just turn that into a simple bar chart. And remember, I said about how gray was going to be important. So you can see these grays are coming in. So if you had gray as a background, you might have to use a different gray or just stick with white. It just gives you the most flexibility. Now, the interesting thing about this tree map, in this instance, it was actually being used for geographic information. So I said, well, maybe just make it a map. And so now I also used the gradient here, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So I was surprised that they used a tree map because it would just make more sense to go with a regular map. So when you understand how to use this language of visualization, it's really very easy to create this kind of visual. Actually, I think this takes less work than all the other things they did. And this simpler version uses color to highlight the important data rather than just throwing all this color at you. So remember, we talked about color before, and it really means 2 things. One is a gradient, and that's for the measure. So in this case, it's the number of % of respondents. And over here, we already talked about using single colors for the dimensions. So the goal of using the gradients or unique colors is to make something stand out. A lot of times, like I think this author did, is they're trying to make it look pretty because they say, oh, if we don't have enough color, it's dull and not interesting. But more often not, that's when you're actually going to get into trouble. So use a neutral color like a light gray when you don't really have any information that you're trying to make stand out. If you just want to have it there, that's perfect. But if there's nothing like that you need to make really stand out to bring a point in front of somebody, just keep it simple like this. Now, there's one more thing that you might have picked up on the original dashboard. It actually didn't have a title. So now if people knew what that page was meant, maybe everybody who was seeing it knew the context for it and it didn't need a title. But let's say that page was sent around separately. So maybe somebody picked it out of a presentation. It might create a lot of uncertainty if it got to somebody and they weren't really sure what that was supposed to be about. So always make sure to have a title. And I think this kind of title, it might seem a little bit long to you, but it's very specific. It sets up exactly what is supposed to be the message that someone takes away and draws them into it. And again, let's look at some of the titles of each of the individual charts. So in this one, respondents by revenue, what is the revenue distribution? Again, making it very clear. And for the maps, respondent by regional cluster is a little bit of a mouthful. How about where are executives located? Sounds a lot better. It's simple and it's very specific. So just to recap the 3 ideas we covered today, I hope these are going to be things that you can take at least one thing away and put it into action right away with your work. And I would say, don't worry about getting it perfect for all of these things. One of the great usability thing about Tableau is that you can make these kinds of changes quickly. You can make improvements quickly. So don't go back and say you have to try to do all the things I talked about today. Take it in steps. But just keep in mind the 3 things. 1, it's your job to help the reader's brain tune in to the message. Don't make it hard on them. Number 2, that you want to use color to focus attention, draw people to the most important things that you want them to take away from the data. And third is that questions create engagement. They create curiosity and draw people in to examine what's going on and to really think about what it is they're trying to get at, which again is decisions and taking action. That's what you've got to concentrate on. So just a couple of things, ways that you can get in touch with me if you're interested and learn and keep track of the things I'm talking about. If you happen to have access to Pluralsight, I have a short piece up there called Data Strategy Equals Business Strategy. So go take a look at that. You can find me out on YouTube. I've got interviews with people from the industry. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or just send me an email, lee@decisionviz.com. So I think if we've got any questions out there, let's hit those.
Hey, Lee. Sorry, I actually had a quick question. So I know you provided the link as a resource before, but I was wondering, like, do you have any tips or recommendations for people who are just starting out making dashboards, or like any sort of literacy, or I mean, even the Tableau community in terms of how they can improve their dashboards without, I guess, without those dashboards looking, you know, like they're new, right? So what would you recommend?
Ooh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of views about kind of data literacy in itself, and it's a broad term. So some of it is about just how you organize your data and get your data ready to be analyzed. Certainly, that's an important area. That's not something that we're talking about here today. There are certainly some best practices documents that Tableau has out there for visualizations. Those are, I would say, a little bit more hands-on kinds of things in terms of, hey, do this in Tableau or don't do this in Tableau. So those are great to resources, and they're just free to download, and they're pretty easy to go through. The best thing I could recommend is, you know, outside of, you know, the kinds of things that I've got, you know, we talked about today, without saying, go and take a class or anything like that, is to just look at examples out there. I would say look at some of the things that come out on Tableau's Viz of the Day, although I'll say, and Tableau even says this on the visuals, that not all of them follow best practices, but you might get inspired by something there. And that's just a place, because there's a lot of volume, you can see a lot of activity of what is considered maybe a good idea, at least. And then there's just so many resources and books out there. Stephen Few, some stuff from Tufte that you could get your hands on as well. There's just a lot of material out there. So I don't really have a condensed list that I could send around, although that's something maybe I should think about doing. So that's actually a good question.
Thanks, Lee. Another question that came through from Liz. So she said it didn't have to do anything with the colors, but she was curious why you placed filters within the chart headers rather than putting them to the top or along the right side.
Yeah, I like that question. So I always like to put the filters along the top or along actually the left side, but that's for another discussion. But I also like to put them as close to where they're needed when it makes sense. So since I was able to combine it in that way, it does a couple things. One, it draws the reader right to it. They're like, oh, I could change this right here and understand that it's going to affect everything on the page directly. So it kind of serves multiple purposes, right? It gives people, it clues them in that they can change it right there. And it also gives them a reminder of what the actual selection is. And I don't have to put in 2021 or whatever the year is in the actual title of every chart that was on the page. So it's just highly redundant to put it everywhere. So it serves a couple of different uses in that case. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's helpful.
Any other questions coming in?
If there's any other questions, feel free to write them in the Q&A, but I think so far right now, it looks like we're good, Lee. Very helpful presentation. We appreciate you jumping on and being our first presenter here. So we appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Happy to do it. And hopefully we can get folks to start using some of these ideas. And I'll just say to everybody, if you have any questions, if you try some of these things and you want to just get my opinion, if you've applied it in the right way, just shoot me an email and we could take a look at it together, hop on a quick call or something, and I'm happy to do that with you. So let me forward your slide over here.
All right, so I think just to wrap things up, so some ideas we had for the next couple of quarters. If the weather is nice, we would love to meet everyone. It's been a while since we've all been in person, so a meet and greet would be awesome. And we also had the idea, I know we have a bunch of participants from M&T. So we're thinking about doing a Seneca 1 tour. We know that the M&T Tech Hub is over there now. So I thought that would be pretty cool as well. But if you have any other ideas, questions, we're on LinkedIn. So the Buffalo Tableau user group. We are on Instagram as well, but feel free to sign up for, future updates or other meetings that we'll have in the future on that link. But I think that'll close us out. Thank you all for joining, and thank you again for Lee. Great presentation. Bye, everyone.